The envelope skimmed across the polished table, its soft scrape cutting through the room like a warning shot. Inside lay a check worth $500,000. And Daniel Whitmore leaned back confident, satisfied, certain he'd just erased a problem with ink and arrogance. What he didn't realize was that the man across from him, the one he dismissed as disposable, quietly held the leverage to dismantle nearly half of his business empire. My name is Lucas Reed, and this is how I watched my wife's family underestimate me while their financial destiny rested comfortably in my control. For 3 years, I'd been married to Claire Whitmore, the only daughter of one of Chicago's most influential property magnates. And for those same 3 years, I played the role they assigned me without protest, the average analyst, the forgettable husband, the man they believed their daughter had settled for. I drove an aging sedan, lived modestly, and said very little at family gatherings. What they never questioned was why I never defended myself, because the truth was inconvenient. I owned enough voting shares in Whitmore Holdings to remove Daniel from his own company with a single call. I chose patience instead, observing, listening, letting them reveal exactly who they were when they thought power was one-sided. The invitation arrived midweek. Claire slid her phone toward me during breakfast, her expression already tense. "It's my mother," she said quietly. "Dinner on Friday, just us. She says it's important." Important in her family's language never meant good news. It meant judgment. It meant strategy. It meant they were ready to address the mistake they believed their daughter had made, marrying a man who didn't match their image, their status, or their expectations. "Sounds memorable," I replied calmly, already considering how revealing the night might become. Claire set her mug down harder than necessary. "Lucas, maybe we shouldn't go. When they get this formal, it's never accidental." She was right. And that's exactly why I smiled. She wasn't exaggerating. Over the 3 years of our marriage, Daniel and Margaret had made their disappointment obvious in quiet, calculated ways. Margaret's habit of casually bringing up Claire's former boyfriend, Evan, now the founder of a fast-growing venture fund. Daniel's endless praise for rising stars in his field, always delivered with a glance that reminded me I wasn't counted among them. Even family dinners were orchestrated, me placed at the far end of the table while Claire's polished, well-connected cousins debated investments and acquisitions like a private club. I'd never been invited to join. "We're going," I said without hesitation. "I want to know what this is really about." What Claire didn't know, what no one knew except my lawyer and a pair of discreet financial advisors, was that Lucas Reed, the quiet analyst they overlooked, was also LR Capital, the shadow investment group that had been methodically accumulating Whitmore Holdings shares for nearly 8 years. It began when I was 24, newly graduated from Stanford with a background in quantitative finance and a modest inheritance left by my grandmother, where most people would have spent it on comfort or travel. I invested it in a faltering real estate firm run by a man named Daniel Whitmore, overextended, overconfident, and bleeding cash after the fallout of the 2008 market collapse. I'd analyzed his company relentlessly. The assets were strong. The locations were prime. But the debt structure was suffocating and investor confidence was evaporating. He needed capital and he needed it fast. So I bought in slowly, invisibly, through layers of shell companies designed to leave no trail. Within 3 years, I held 14%. By the time I met Claire at a charity gala 5 years ago, that stake had grown to 29%. When we married, it crossed 41. Now it stood at 47%, making me the largest individual shareholder in Whitmore Holdings. Daniel Whitmore reported to me. He just didn't know it yet. Meeting Claire had never been part of any strategy. I attended that fundraiser to support a client receiving an award. She was there because her mother insisted she appear at another social obligation she clearly despised. We met at the bar, both seeking refuge from dull conversations and louder egos. Then she mocked her mother's carefully rehearsed society tone so perfectly that I nearly spilled my drink. I got her laughing when I admitted I had absolutely no clue which fork was meant for which course. We ended up talking for 3 uninterrupted hours, and when she finally shared her number, she added a disclaimer. "Just so you know," she said, half smiling, "my family is intense. Money, status, appearances, it's kind of their whole world." If that's going to be an issue, we should probably stop here. I smiled and gave her the most honest answer I could without exposing everything. Money doesn't tell you who someone is. Integrity does. 3 months later, I asked her to marry me. 6 months after that, we stood in front of a small group of people who genuinely mattered and said our vows despite her mother's determined efforts to turn it into a headline-worthy social event. Claire shut that down immediately, choosing intimacy over spectacle. Daniel raised a glass and delivered a toast that barely hid his regret that his daughter had married someone he considered beneath her future. I smiled through it all, fully aware that the man poking fun at my unremarkable career was only hosting that reception because my fund had quietly kept his company solvent. I knew the risk I was taking. Every month, Claire worried about money when she didn't need to. Our place was comfortable, but she'd been raised in luxury. Our trip stayed domestic because explaining European vacations on an analyst's paycheck wasn't exactly believable. Still, she adapted better than I ever expected, never complaining, always reminding me that being together mattered more than the lifestyle she left behind. But I could see the weight it put on her, especially during family events when her mother would casually remark on Claire's adjusted expectations. "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" she asked once after a Thanksgiving dinner where Daniel spent 20 minutes explaining real estate development to me, slowly, confidently, incorrectly, because his opinion doesn't define me, I told her, and because the people with the most power in a room are usually the ones no one bothers to notice. If you've ever been underestimated by people who thought they were superior, hit that subscribe button now. Drop a comment about a time someone misjudged you and regretted it. And tap that like button, because this story is about to take a sharp turn. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when Daniel learns who's actually been steering his company from the shadows. Friday arrived wrapped in crisp autumn air, the kind that makes Chicago almost pleasant. Claire spent nearly an hour getting ready, changing outfits more than once before, settling on something that balanced respectability with restraint. I stuck to khakis and a button-down, the look of harmless competence Daniel found reassuring. The Whitmore estate stretched across several manicured acres in Highland Park, less a home than a shrine to wealth. The driveway wound through immaculate gardens before opening to a towering entrance that felt borrowed from a European palace. As we reached the door, Claire squeezed my hand. "Whatever they're planning," she whispered, "remember, I chose you. Nothing they say changes that." The door opened and her mother stood there herself, unexpected. Normally that responsibility belonged to the staff. "Claire, sweetheart," she said, pulling her daughter into a hug that was practiced enough not to smudge her makeup. Then her eyes shifted to me. "Lucas." My name landed flat, acknowledged, not welcomed. The dining room had been prepared for 4, but nothing about it suggested warmth. Crystal stemware caught the light. Porcelain plates looked fragile enough to require insurance, and the silverware was arranged with military precision, an unspoken test for anyone who hadn't been raised in rooms like this. Daniel sat at the head of the table, wearing a tailored suit despite being in his own home. That was Daniel, always on display, always reminding the room who he believed was in charge. "Lucas," he said, rising to shake my hand. His grip was firm, deliberate, the kind meant to establish hierarchy. "Glad you could make it." As though attendance had ever been optional. Dinner began politely enough. Margaret asked Claire about her work at the nonprofit where she oversaw local outreach programs. Daniel spoke at length about a new commercial project breaking ground downtown. I responded exactly as expected, interested but uninformed, engaged but harmless, careful not to reveal that I understood his market better than he ever would. Then, as the plates from the main course were cleared away, Daniel reached for a leather portfolio resting beside his chair. The kind executives carried. The kind that meant the conversation was about to change. "Lucas," he said, his voice shifting into something rehearsed and authoritative. "Margaret and I wanted to discuss something serious, something that directly impacts Claire's future." Claire's fingers laced tightly through mine beneath the table. She felt it too. She may not have known the details, but she knew the moment. "We've been very concerned about Claire's well-being," Margaret added, blotting her lips delicately. "She sacrificed so much when she married you, comfort, opportunity, a certain standing. I felt Claire tense beside me. Mom, we've been over this. Let us finish, Daniel interrupted, lifting a hand. This isn't about blame. It's about addressing a situation. He opened the portfolio. Inside were neatly stacked documents and on top a check. Even from where I sat, the number was impossible to ignore. Lucas, I'll be straightforward, Daniel continued. I respect clarity in business. You seem like a respectable young man, but let's be realistic. You married well above your position. That's not meant as an insult, it's simply reality. Claire had options. She chose you. We've done our best to accept that. But Margaret said smoothly, we won't watch our daughter struggle financially out of stubborn pride. So we've created a solution, one that works for everyone. Daniel pushed the portfolio toward me across the table. Inside sat an annulment contract, and clipped neatly to the front was a check made out for $500,000. That's more than you'd earn in a decade at your current position, Daniel said, his tone calm and assured. The voice of someone who had never once been challenged by anyone. He ranked beneath himself. Sign the papers, take the money, and walk away. You'll be better off than you ever were before meeting Claire, and Claire can return to a life that actually fits who she is. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. Claire looked stunned, like the air had been knocked out of her. Margaret focused intently on her nails, already treating the matter as resolved. Daniel wore a faint, satisfied smile, the expression of a man convinced he'd handled a complication with the precision of a financial transaction. I studied the check. $500,000. To Daniel, it was pocket change. To the version of me he believed existed, it was a fortune. And that was the irony. The man offering me this money could only afford it because I'd spent 8 years quietly, keeping his collapsing company alive with my capital. That's a very generous proposal, I said at last, keeping my expression neutral. Daniel's smile grew. I knew you'd be practical. Just so I'm clear, I continued, lifting the check and examining it. You're asking me to give up my marriage to Claire for $500,000. It's an annulment, Margaret corrected smoothly. Much cleaner than divorce. No blame, no mess. Just an acknowledgement that the marriage should never have happened. Claire shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is insane. You don't get to buy people. Sit down, sweetheart, Daniel said sharply. The adults are speaking. I am an adult, Claire snapped. And my husband is sitting right here being offered money to abandon me. How dare you? Daniel didn't even glance at her. His attention stayed fixed on me, confident, assured, certain the outcome was already decided. Lucas understands how things work, he said. Don't you? Sometimes money is simply the cleanest solution. I placed the check back on the table, flattening it carefully against the cloth. Then I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. Before I answer, I said calmly, I need to make a quick call. If you'll excuse me for a moment. Lucas, what are you doing? Claire asked, confusion cutting through her anger. Making sure everyone here has all the relevant information, I replied. I dialed my attorney, Samuel Harper, who I knew would pick up no matter the hour. Samuel had overseen my interests for 8 years. He understood exactly what it meant when I called during a family dinner. Sam, it's me, I said. I'm having dinner with the Whitmores and something unexpected has come up. Can you pull the latest ownership breakdown for Whitmore Holdings? Yes, right now. I'll wait. Daniel frowned. What does your lawyer have to do with this? Everything, I said simply. A moment later, Samuel came back on the line and I switched my phone to speaker. Sam, I said calmly, would you mind explaining to everyone here the current ownership breakdown of Whitmore Holdings? His voice filled the dining room, measured, clinical, impossible to ignore. Certainly. Whitmore Holdings has 100 million outstanding shares. The largest shareholder is LR Capital, which holds 47 million shares, equivalent to 47% of the company. The second largest shareholder is Daniel Whitmore personally, with 18 million shares or 18%. The remaining 35% is divided among institutional and private investors. Daniel stared at the phone as though it were speaking another language. What is this? He demanded. And what does any of this have to do with you? I didn't answer him directly. Sam, I said, could you clarify who owns LR Capital? LR Capital is wholly owned by Lucas Reed, Samuel replied. It was formed 8 years ago using inherited funds and has served as Mr. Reed's Primary investment vehicle. Based on today's closing price, the Whitmore Holdings stake is valued at approximately $10.8 billion. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was seismic. Claire's mouth hung open. Margaret's face drained of color entirely. Daniel looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. I don't understand, Daniel finally said, his voice barely audible. I picked up the check and held it out toward him. This, I said evenly, is $500,000. You're offering me that amount to walk away from your daughter. I paused, letting the contrast settle. I own 47% of your company. At current valuations, that stake is worth $10.8 billion. Do you know what that means? Samuel answered before Daniel could. It means Mr. Reed is the single largest shareholder in Whitmore Holdings. When aligned with minority shareholders who routinely follow his recommendations, he effectively controls voting outcomes. In practical terms, Mr. Reed could remove Daniel Whitmore as CEO through a standard board vote. Daniel's face flushed deep red. That's not possible, he stammered. LR Capital is, I thought it was. You assumed it was an institution, I said quietly. A hedge fund. Private equity. Something anonymous. You never questioned it because the money arrived exactly when you needed it. 8 years ago, I continued, your company was buried in debt. Banks wouldn't touch you. Traditional financing dried up the moment people realized how badly you'd overextended yourself. Then a quiet investor appeared, buying distressed shares, funding projects, keeping everything afloat. And you never asked who was holding the lifeline. You never bothered to look too closely at where that money was coming from. I pushed my chair back and stood, circling the table until I stopped directly in front of Daniel. Every major project you've completed over the last 8 years was funded by capital I supplied. The riverfront high-rise, mine. The lakeside complex, also mine. Those suburban office developments, they kept you afloat during the 2015 slump. Every dollar came from me. Margaret finally found her voice. But that's impossible. You're a data analyst. You live in that tiny apartment. You drive that awful car. I am a data analyst, I said evenly. I analyze financial data for clients who require advanced investment strategy. That part is true, it's just not the entire picture. Our apartment is modest because Emma and I chose it. The car works perfectly fine. I don't measure my worth through expensive displays. Emma was crying now, but not from heartbreak, from fury. So you watched all of this, she said. You let them talk down to you, insult you, humiliate you, knowing you could end everything with a single phone call. I could have, I admitted. But I wanted to see who they really were. I wanted to know how far they'd go when they believed they held all the power. I looked at Daniel, still frozen in his chair. As it turns out, pretty far. Nathan, Daniel began, his voice trembling. I didn't know. You have to understand, I had no idea who you were. Would it have changed anything? I asked quietly. If I truly were who you assumed I was, would this offer suddenly be acceptable? Would trying to buy me away from your daughter somehow become justified? Margaret was crying openly now, mascara streaking down her carefully perfected face. We were only trying to protect Emma. Protect her? I let out a short laugh, empty of humor. You weren't protecting her. You were trying to control her. There's a difference. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, opening my email. With a few deliberate taps, I sent a message I'd written months ago, waiting for the exact right moment. I've just contacted the board of directors of Whitmore Holdings, I said calmly. An emergency meeting has been scheduled for Monday morning. The agenda is simple, a vote on the current CEO's position. Daniel shot to his feet. You can't do this. The board will stand by me. They know what I've built. They know what we built, I corrected. And they also know that 47% of the voting shares support new leadership. I've already spoken with the other major stakeholders. When the vote happens Monday, you'll be removed as CEO. An interim executive team will be appointed while a permanent replacement is selected. This is my company, Daniel shouted, panic completely overtaking him. I built it from nothing. No, I said quietly. You built it to the brink of collapse. I saved it while you treated me like I wasn't even worth basic respect at your dinner table. I turned toward Emma, who was staring at me as if she were seeing me for the very first time. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, I said quietly. I wanted to, more times than I can count. But I needed to know something first. I needed to see whether your family could ever accept me for who I am. Not for what I own. Tonight answered that. Why, she whispered. Why let them belittle you when you could have stopped it instantly? Because embarrassment fades, I said. But character doesn't. Tonight, your parents showed me exactly who they are. They tried to pay me to walk away from the person I love most. They chose reputation over your happiness. I needed you to see that truth for yourself. I picked up the check one final time and tore it neatly in two. I don't want your money, Daniel. I never did. I wanted to belong to a family. I wanted to prove that I could love your daughter without caring about her surname or her inheritance, but all you ever saw was someone you believed was beneath you. Samuel's voice came through the phone again. Lucas, should I move forward with the board notifications? I looked at Daniel, slumped in his chair, his confidence completely gone. I looked at Margaret, clutching her necklace as if it might somehow shield her from reality. And then I looked at Claire, my wife, who deserved parents who measured love and devotion, not balance sheets. Yes, I said at last. Proceed with everything. It's time for new leadership. The drive home was quiet at first. Claire sat beside me in my very unimpressive car, watching the city lights blur past the window. After several minutes, she spoke. How long have you been preparing all of this? I wasn't, I answered honestly. I invested in your father's company long before I ever met you. It was simply a smart opportunity. Meeting you, falling in love, that wasn't strategy. That was chance. A rare, beautiful one. But you could have told me, she said softly. Any time over the past 3 years. I could have, I agreed. But would you have believed I married you for you, and not for your family's influence? Would you have trusted that I loved you for who you are, not what you represent? She was silent for a long while. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe not at first. I needed you to know, without doubt, that I chose you when I had nothing to gain. And I needed your family to show their true selves. Tonight they did. What happens now? She asked. To my parents. To my father's company. The company will be fine, I said. Better than it's ever been. I'll bring in a professional leadership team that knows how to run it properly. Your father will be offered a consulting role if he wants one, just without unchecked power, and with compensation that reflects reality. And my parents? She asked quietly. I exhaled. That choice is yours. They're still your parents. I'll never ask you to choose between them and me. But I also won't pretend that what they did tonight was acceptable. She reached across the console and laced her fingers with mine. I choose you. I always have, even when I believed you were just a data analyst with an old car and modest plans. Especially then? I asked softly. Especially then, she said, because that version of you loved me without expecting anything in return. That version chose me when you thought I was just someone working at a non-profit with a difficult family. That was real. That's what matters. We turned into the parking lot of our apartment complex, the unremarkable building that had been home for 3 years. By the next morning, I could have bought us a penthouse. We could have moved to Highland Park, into a house grand enough to make her parents' estate feel outdated. But standing there under the dim lot lights, looking at her, I knew none of that mattered. We're staying, I said suddenly. She smiled for the first time since dinner. Staying? Maybe we'll buy the place instead of renting, I added. But I like our life. I like being ordinary. I like knowing happiness doesn't require a mansion, a luxury car, or the approval of people who don't deserve it. And the money? She asked. $10 billion isn't exactly something you ignore. We're not ignoring it, I said. We're using it properly. You're going to grow your non-profit. We'll fund programs that actually change lives. And maybe, if we're feeling generous, we'll create scholarships for students who want to study business but can't afford it. Kids like you? She asked quietly. Kids like the person I would have been if my grandfather hadn't left me that inheritance, I said. Yeah. That Monday, the board meeting unfolded exactly as expected. Daniel was removed as CEO with a 78% vote in favor. He sat at the far end of the conference table, small, silent, while the same directors, who once praised him, voted to take away everything he'd clung to. Margaret called Claire 17 times that day. Every call went unanswered. The following afternoon, a certified envelope arrived at our apartment. Inside was a handwritten letter from Margaret. Claire, I don't expect forgiveness. What we did crossed a line that can't be undone. But you deserve to know that in our own distorted way, we believed we were protecting you. We convinced ourselves that Lucas was taking advantage of you. We were wrong, painfully, undeniably wrong. Your father is broken by all of this, not because of the company, though that loss cuts deep, but because he realizes he may have lost you, and because the man he dismissed so easily turned out to be the one who preserved everything he ever built. If you're willing, when you're ready, could we talk? No contracts, no checks, no hidden motives, just a mother who wants to understand the man her daughter chose. Claire read the letter twice before setting it down on the counter. Do you think they're sincere? She asked. I think they're afraid, I said. And sometimes fear strips people down in ways comfort never does. What would you do? She asked. I considered it carefully. I'd give them one opportunity. Just one, but on our terms. Here, at our place. No theater, no status symbols. If they can accept us as we actually are, then maybe there's something worth rebuilding. If not, at least the truth will be clear. Claire picked up her phone and typed out a reply. Dinner at our apartment this Friday. No dress code. No expectations. Just family. She showed it to me before hitting send. Too cold? Exactly right, I said. That Friday, Daniel and Margaret arrived looking smaller. Daniel wore jeans and a sweater. Margaret skipped the layers of makeup and jewelry she usually hid behind. Whatever armor they once relied on, they'd left it behind. Lucas, Daniel said when I opened the door. Thank you for seeing us. We sat around our modest dining table, eating pasta Claire had cooked herself. No staff, no crystal, no spectacle. Just 4 people sharing a meal and attesting whether something damaged beyond pride could still be repaired. I owe you an apology, Daniel said after a long pause. Several, actually. For every dinner where I made you feel insignificant. For every remark about your career, your car, your upbringing. For that check. His voice faltered. For treating you like you were worth a fixed price when you were the man who protected my company and loved my daughter. I appreciate you saying that, I replied carefully. But the apology that matters most isn't mine to accept. I looked at Claire. She's the one you tried to control. She's the one whose happiness you put below appearances. That's where the real apology belongs. Daniel turned toward his daughter, his composure finally breaking. His eyes filled as he spoke. Claire, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't recognize what you saw in Lucas. I made you feel like your choice wasn't enough. Like you weren't enough. You chose a man who loves you for exactly who you are, who never needed your name, your money, or your family's standing. That's all any father should want. And I nearly destroyed it because I let my ego lead me. Margaret reached across the table and took Claire's hand. I spent your entire life preparing you for a very specific future, a certain kind of marriage, a certain kind of world. When you chose something different, I thought you were rejecting everything I'd taught you. But you weren't rejecting anything. You were choosing something genuine over something empty. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that. Claire was crying now, but she didn't pull away. Do you really mean it? She asked. Because I can't survive another night like last Friday. I can't sit by while you treat Lucas like he isn't enough, when he's the best man I know. We mean it, Daniel said without hesitation. And we'll prove it. He turned to me. Lucas, I'd like to take you to lunch this week. Just the 2 of us. I want to understand how you think, your approach to investing, your philosophy. Everything I should have been curious about over the past 3 years, instead of brushing you aside. I glanced at Claire. She gave a small nod. Lunch would be fine, I said. But there's something you should understand. I never invested in your company to control you or to harm you. I did it because it was a strong opportunity. And I won't apologize for being skilled at something you didn't realize. I could do. I wouldn't expect you to, he replied. I'm just hoping you'll show me how you did it, because clearly I was running a company without knowing who was truly keeping it afloat. 3 months later, Whitmore Holdings announced a comprehensive restructuring. Daniel remained on the board as a senior advisor, but day-to-day leadership was handed to a professional executive team that transformed the company almost immediately. The stock climbed 40% following the transition. Claire's nonprofit received a $50 million grant from the Reed Family Foundation. created to fulfill the promise we'd made that night in the parking lot. We funded community programs, scholarships, and initiatives for people who were where I'd once been, capable, ambitious but lacking access. Daniel and Margaret began coming to dinner at our apartment every other week. They learned to leave their expectations and their status outside and simply be Claire's parents. Daniel even traded in his luxury car for something more practical, joking that if a billionaire could be content driving an old sedan, he could probably survive without a Mercedes. The story of the hidden billionaire made headlines for a few weeks, but I declined almost every interview request. What happened at that dinner table wasn't newsworthy. It wasn't about stocks or business columns. It was personal. About family, about choices, about the truths that matter when you strip away appearances and prestige. About 6 months later, Emma and I were sitting on our balcony, watching the city lights shimmer across the skyline. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Letting them humiliate you all that time when you could have just told them the truth?" "Not for a second," I said. "Because I learned something invaluable. I know your parents love you more than their pride. I know you chose me for who I am, not for anything else. And I know I don't need anyone's approval to be exactly myself." "And who are you?" she asked, smiling softly. "I'm Nathan Cross. I'm a data analyst. I'm a billionaire investor. I'm your husband. And I'm the man who proved that the most powerful people in any room are often the ones nobody notices." She leaned forward and kissed me. Below us, the city twinkled with endless possibilities, opportunities we hadn't even imagined yet. Somewhere across town, Daniel Whitmore was probably working late, learning the company from scratch, finally seeing it the way he should have all along. Margaret, somewhere in her house, was likely planning our next dinner, figuring out how not to overdo it. And here we were, in our modest apartment, the home we chose deliberately, rich, in the only ways that truly mattered. We had each other. We had honesty, and we had a future built on something more enduring than money could ever buy. The envelope didn't change everything. The $500,000 check didn't matter. What mattered was seeing people for who they really were and deciding what you would do with that knowledge. I chose love. I chose integrity. And I chose to turn being underestimated into the greatest advantage I could have. Because when no one expects you to succeed, victory tastes that much sweeter. My name is Nathan Cross. I'm the anonymous investor who saved my father-in-law's company while he tried to buy me off. And this is the story of how I discovered that the truest form of triumph isn't revenge, it's living with integrity. It's building something real while everyone else chases illusions. Daniel Whitmore tried to buy me for $500,000. What he didn't know was that I had already earned something far more valuable: his respect. It just took 3 years and one unforgettable dinner for him to realize it. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated or dismissed by people who thought they were above you, share your experience below. Celebrate everyone who's proven that success isn't defined by your start or by whose attention you have. It's defined by who you are when no one is watching and what you do when everyone counts you out. Subscribe for more stories about justice, redemption, and the quiet satisfaction of proving doubters wrong. Hit like if you believe character outweighs wealth. Love matters more than status. And the sweetest victories are the ones no one sees coming. Remember, the most dangerous person at any table is the one everyone ignores. While they're busy underestimating you, you're busy becoming exactly who you need to be to change everything. Stay hungry, stay humble, and never let anyone make you feel small just because they can't see how big you truly are.